Hello to all of my subscribers for Confessions from an Educated Fool / Fool's Gold. This is Donald Earl Collins coming to you once again. All my subscribers, unpaid and paid, welcome again. Want to talk to you about a few things that are more on the Confessions from an Educated Fool side of things. My work life, such as it is these days, where I'm working a lot of hours, but I'm not getting paid a lot of money for a variety of reasons, right? And so, and like I said in my previous updates, you'll get more snippets of the recent interview I did regarding Spinning Sage's Gold, its themes, key questions to think about, those sorts of things that later on in the week. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about what's been going on with me a little bit that's not related to the book. Um, I think my time with Al Jazeera, at least as a contributing writer, if not just a regular a freelancer who occasionally sends some stuff, is pretty much over. Um, it's over for mostly because of them, not because of me. Um, they're for all of the things that I've had problems with regarding Al Jazeera English opinion section over the last, say, 9 years that I've worked with them. I also have to give them credit before I jump in and give them critique. Credit around the fact that a lot of the stuff that I've published, particularly around systemic racism in the United States and in the West, genocide, um, the rise of far right movements, radical movements to counteract those movements, narcissism and the nature of narcissism and how it's a societal issue and not just an issue of an individual person, or how individualism itself is a form of narcissism. Being able to combine my life story with the expertise that I have as a historian and being able to show connections, counterintuitive connections between things that are happening in the present, being able to figure out what that means for our immediate future, maybe even long-term future as a society in the U.S., as a species for the West, all of that, and being able to also relate it to the past has been my bread and butter with them over the last 9 years. There would be no Spinning Sage's Gold if I hadn't been able to start publishing some of the pieces that would end up being parts of the themes around Spinning Sage's Gold had I not been working for Al Jazeera, or it would have taken a heck of a lot longer. And with the mainstream media in our country moving increasingly to the center right, I think that anything left is pretty much centrist, and anything truly leftist doesn't even belong in their newspapers, magazines, their websites, parts of, podcasts or anything like that. It's left me with fewer and fewer places to publish my more, well, let's say, counterintuitive pieces that have these center left or maybe even leftist leanings as far as mainstream media is concerned. So with that, I'm giving them credit. But I can't give them full credit at this point because they fucked me over the last couple of years, to be perfectly honest with you. Things are I've had issues with them here and there over the years regarding making sure that all the links that I put in my articles stay in, for example, because of the fact that I want to be able to show where I got these ideas, these quotes, references, etc. But once I started working for them as a contributing writer in the late spring and early summer of 2022, um, the idea was that we would do I would do 2 articles a month for them, get paid for those in a fairly timely manner, and be able to do that on a regular basis or semi-regular basis, depending on my full-time teaching schedule, which, for the first few months worked until it didn't. And between my schedule getting busier and them not exactly pressing me for new pieces, there'd be times where I'd go a few months in between without contributing. But it was okay then because I wasn't really under contract, and while 2 articles a month was an aspiration, they also understood that my situation varied depending on how much I was teaching and how often I was teaching, right? But once things started getting regular and more regular in 2023 and definitely 2024, I could start seeing through the cracks of how this thing was really working. Um, Sometimes it would be weeks between the time I would submit a piece, a pitch for a piece, and then it would get approved, and then I'd write the article in a day or two, and then I'd be sitting around for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, in one case on my piece dealing with turning left at the next intersection, the piece that was about why we need a viable center left or leftist third party in the United States. I wrote that article actually before I even sent it in. I just proposed the idea in May. They approved it in June, and they sat on it for over a month. So that by the time it came out, Biden was already on the verge of being out of the race. And so it was kind of outdated, right? And I could have been mad about that, but I was like, okay, at least I'm getting paid. But they also were doing things like I had an article that I wrote back at the beginning of 2023, I think. It was beginning of 2023. I don't remember the article. You know, you write 53 articles for an organization over a number of years. You tend to not remember the exact title of every article. But it turned out that they were behind, and I thought at first that they had just, they just taking their time and paying me. It turned out that they had completely not put my paperwork in for an article that I wrote in January 2023, right? I brought this up originally the summer of 2023 that I hadn't gotten paid, that I felt like they were behind on paying me. They said, no, we've done all our paperwork. But when I looked at it again after I had left Loyola, after my time with Loyola, I was looking at my finances and looking at where my money was coming from and realizing that they had been underpaying me for a while, because they hadn't paid for this piece. It turned out they never put the paperwork in. So I went 20 months without getting paid for one of my pieces with them. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Once I left Loyola and let them know that I can basically do 2 articles a month, for an extended period of time because, I had less work at that point. They initially agreed to it, but they were taking their time, so it was actually adding up to about 1 article every 4 to 6 weeks. I wasn't getting paid sometimes for upwards of 5 weeks between the time I wrote an article and it was published and the time it actually got printed. And there are other times where you're just sitting on stuff. And then this past year, the year that was basically my best year writing for them, where I wrote 13 articles, it was sporadic, right? There were times where I'd submit a pitch and they would immediately approve it, and then I would immediately write it, and then it would be published within a few days, standard, news organization practice. But then I would basically be waiting around 3 to 4 weeks before payments. So sometimes they would owe me, 4 figures worth of money for 3 articles because they were that far behind. At one stretch, they were so far behind that when I sent them a group of pitches because I was thinking ahead, they decided to not go with any of them and their excuse was, well, they didn't really give me a reason, but I assumed it was because of money. But then things picked up during the summer, and I was writing at a pace of basically 1 article every 2 weeks. They were still taking their time and paying me, but it wasn't an enormous delay, meaning more than 4 weeks between the time I wrote a couple of pieces and the time I got paid for a couple of pieces. But I was still having problems around making sure my links stayed in, making sure that whatever I wrote came out in a timely manner, that sort of thing. And then September rolled around, and this is right after I'd written my piece about racism isn't just about hatred. They called it racism isn't hatred, which is not what I wrote. It's racism isn't just about hatred, which kind of miffed me to begin with. But then they took 6 weeks to pay me for the piece, right? At a time where I really needed the money, they took forever to pay me for it. And then in the interim, they were rejecting one pitch after another. Keep in mind, this is a place I've done more than 50 articles for. So, you know, when your rejection rate is somewhere around 5 or 6% over the course of 8 years of doing work with this place, both as just a regular freelancer and then now as a contributing writer, we go from that to basically 10 straight pitches being rejected, and they're not grandiose pitches. They're the same kinds of pitches I've been doing for all the time. They finally said to me, after basically me inquiring by phone and by email what's going on, they didn't have any more money to pay me for the remainder of the year. You know, you can't plan around that. You cannot plan income around, well, we need you now, but we don't have any money to pay you kinds of things because we're paying other people who are doing stuff that's much more relevant around the Middle East, around South Asia, or around the Balkan Peninsula, places that Al Jazeera covers much more intensely than, say, the United States, right? I had also suspected that they probably hired one of the contributing writers more full time since their articles are coming out more frequently. But of course, they weren't going to tell me that, right? So finally, they get back to me at mid January, just as I'm trying to anticipate getting back to them about whether I should be working with them in 2026 or not, about asking me to write a piece. And the piece I propose is the last piece I wrote for Al Jazeera on why the world needs to boycott the United States, not just the World Cup, but a lot of cultural, political events, companies, individual billionaires, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because of the rise of autocracy not only here, but the promotion of violence that the U.S. is doing more and more around the world, right? Through Israel, through indirectly, right? Wrote that. I wrote it in anticipation of Martin Luther King's birthday, Martin Luther birthday holiday, right? Which is why I mentioned Martin Luther King in the piece, right? So they asked me to write this piece. I wrote it and gave it to them basically within 48 hours of them asking, and you know, nothing. It just sat there for 3 weeks. It didn't make any fucking sense. It sat there for 3 weeks, right? They found, they gave me edits, and then they sat on it for another week. So an article that I basically had written for, maybe early, the middle part of January doesn't come out till almost through the first week in February, right? And I haven't been paid for it. I have not been paid for a piece that I wrote basically almost 3 months ago. That's been on their site for almost 2 months, right? And after 3 weeks after the article was published, all of a sudden all the rules around how I got paid changed. They needed a passport, which they didn't need before. They needed even more banking information than they already had. I haven't changed banks in let's see, 15, 16 years, right? The only thing that's changed is my address. And I changed my address 3 years ago, right? And I got no explanation. It was just a sudden move, and I still haven't gotten paid. I don't know what the fuck is going on here. But what I do know is I can't afford to invest in a place that refuses to invest in me more than it already has, especially considering that so many of my articles have been syndicated all over the world. And as a result, not just through Al Jazeera, but you know, my articles have ended up in newspapers in Nigeria and in Ghana and in South Africa and in Cuba and in China and India and Pakistan and Turkey and so many places around the world. And I'm not going to argue that that doing this work with Al Jazeera hasn't helped me as an author, hasn't helped me as a writer, hasn't helped me as a journalist and a columnist. It has. It's helped in all those ways, right? But as another journalist I know, who Joseph Williams II, once said to me, 7 or 8 years ago. I think we were having a conversation in Giant somewhere in Silver Spring, Maryland. Now that I think about it, said this to me: "You can't eat prestige." It's basically what he said. You can't eat prestige. And at least one of the editors I worked with didn't understand why I was upset about not being paid for basically, haven't been paid for almost 2 months for something I wrote back in January. And I'm kind of like, it's doofus, it's money, right? Pay me, right? I'm not even getting paid what I'm really worth per article, to be honest with you, but at least make sure you pay me on time, right? Right? So if you're not going to pay me what I'm fucking worth, at least pay me what we've agreed that I should be making and not be holding on to my money. Keep in mind, I have since sent them whatever information they thought they needed and they have not gotten back to me, right? So I'm just laying it all on the table. Fuck them and fuck what they've been doing with me from a money standpoint. Pay me. Pay me so I can get out from under you. And if I decide I want to send you another article in the future, Probably not, but if I do send you another article in the future, it'll be on my terms, meaning that I'm not doing this because I'm trying to earn money through you. I'm doing this because I want this particular piece out there through you. Other than that, I don't want to be bothered anymore, right? But that leads to a larger discussion, not just about whether you should be under contract or not, whether you're getting paid what you're worth or not, not just all of those things, but how god awful people are and getting in touch with you and contacting you and making sure that they're being transparent with you about how they're going to pay you, about how they're going to deal with you, about you know you know what how the work is going to be with them, right? And it's not. I mean, and it shouldn't be that I have to pry information out of you to find out you don't have enough money to pay me on a consistent basis. And if you don't have enough money to pay me on a consistent basis, why am I working for you? That kind of thing, right? I'll give you another example that's related but not quite, right? I sent another piece, not non Al Jazeera piece, a longer an essay analysis piece, looking at really the role Black women in leadership should play in shaping the transition from a Western world to a post-Western world. That's basically what the article is about. I've since done revisions of it and sent out a whole nother set of you know things around it in recent months. But this is way back in December. I had done a version of this same piece and sent it to Transition Magazine, right? Sent it like mid-December, December the 15th or the 16th, right? I get an email yesterday from them, and I'm going to read the email to you since it's right on the screen. Dear Donald Earl Collins, we are grateful for your interest in transition and for your patience during this editorial process. After careful review, we have decided that this submission is not right for a magazine at this time. Thank you very much for trusting us with your work. Kind regards, the editors, right? Here's the problem. When you I submitted through Submittable. Submittable is great for a lot of things, right? It keeps track of when you submit, when an editor sends a message to you, if they've accepted your work, if it's being reviewed or in process, if they've rejected it. And I've had a couple of articles I've published as a result of using Submittable with other publishers, other magazines, etc. So it's not like my success rate's 0 for 100 or something. So I do know how to use it. Well, if you look at the activity button underneath here, right? It shows the initial email, the form email I got back from Transition on Tuesday, December 16, 2025 at 4:49 p.m. Transition changed the status of my article submission to in progress on Monday, March 30th at 3:38 p.m. They declined my submission as a potential publication at 4 p.m. on Monday, March 30th, 2026. And the form message went out at that same time. 26. That means my article sat in their inbox for 3.5 months. They opened it at 3:38 p.m. and they declined it within 26 minutes. Now, you could argue that maybe 26 minutes is enough for any editor to do enough of a review to be able to say, I don't really want this. But a careful review, which is what they said in their email, is not the same thing. And anybody who's a writer knows the difference between a careful review and just a plain old, well, this is interesting, but we don't really want this, or this doesn't really fit. That only takes 5 minutes to do. 26 minutes basically indicates you opened it up, and then when you finally got around to looking at it, you're like, I don't like this. I don't really want it. And you just rejected it, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. If you don't want to publish me, I don't really want to work with someone who doesn't want to publish me. That would be ridiculous. What I do have a problem with is you sending me this stupid, fucked up email with this bullshit around. We did a careful review. No, you fucking did not. You did not do a careful review. You just simply decided you didn't want this piece, which is fine, but you took 3.5 months to do something that you could have spent 5 minutes on. And I don't want to hear anything about, oh, we're busy and we got to make sure that we review everything that comes over the transom bullshit. I've been on the other end of this. I've actually done this work where I've had to review other people's essays and give them feedback. And you know what I don't do? I don't act like if I don't really want something, you know, sit on it for 3.5 months, take 5 minutes to review it, and say I did a super thorough review of your piece, and as it turns out, we can't really use it after all because that would be bullshit. And and as someone who is tired of bullshit, I don't like bullshitting people, so don't bullshit me. And so for those of you who are thinking about Transition Magazine, don't waste your time. It's not like they pay a lot of money anyway, and then on top of that, they're going to take fucking forever to tell you no when they could have just done it in 5 minutes. Listen, I've had pieces rejected by places in 3 hours. 3 hours from the time I've submitted it to the time that they decided to say no, which is perfectly fine. Again, rejection is part of the process. Revision's part of the process. Working with editors and trying to figure out what they're wanting, how you can dovetail that with what you're writing about as part of the process, which shouldn't be part of the process, is wasting people's time. Don't waste my time. And I feel like both in the case of Al Jazeera, especially in the course of the last year, and with transition, that these are examples of people wasting writers' time. So if you're going to continue to write, those of you who are, somewhere on the scale of between an Aspire writer who's published a little bit, wants to do more, and someone like me who's, you've broken through, but you'd like to be able to make a living off of this a little bit more than what you have, you don't want people wasting your time. And that's fucked up when they did. So that's my 2 cents for today. More like 20 cents. Okay. Next time.